it's like hopefully a bunch of you have listened to the podcast Unsolicited Feedback. To give you a little bit of background, Fareed and I started about this in September, October of last year, something
Yeah,
like
September
that.
of last year.
And the format, we started off by doing the traditional Q&A, like inviting a guest and Q&A, and honestly, we just got bored with it. And so we we did something a little bit different. We still invited a guest, and then we started to basically take things that we were talking about anyways, in Slack or in meetups in person, and just start recording them. And that ended up being kind of debating, banter, positive, constructive feedback about recent product launches, things in tech, all that fun stuff. So if you haven't checked out the podcast, definitely do so. Fareed, what was your favorite episode from the first season?
Oh, uh, I mean, the awesome thing about this format for me is I don't have to do a lot of prep and I'm just going to be myself on it. So thank you for surprising me here. I think my favorite episode, I think the one that I think we did the deepest dive and I thought we did the most, I was proud of the thought we did around it and the work we did was the episode with Ravi Mehta around Unity's pricing change. Because I think it was like we really thought it through and got to new places along the conversation, which is kind of the fun part of what the podcast is about, is like when we surprise ourselves along the way. And then I think another one that really stands out for me is our conversation with Nabil Hyatt, because he's just an old friend and it felt like hanging out with friends. So that one was pretty fun too.
I'm a little biased towards the ones that feel like hanging out with friends as well,
Yeah.
but I will plug one other one kind of related to the topic that we're going to talk about today. While the recording was a little bit bumpy because we had all sorts of internet issues, we did do one with Joff Redfern, who was a VP of product at LinkedIn for a while, and then was chief product officer at Atlassian. He's now, joined the other side as a VC, but we ended up just kind of like riffing on ideas for AI products. Like what would we, just like different onboarding techniques and feature ideas and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's just always fun to do a little brainstorm with other generative people. So definitely
You
check
just like
out
that one
that
because I
one.
wasn't there. That
Well,
was the one where I wasn't there.
I will also say we predicted some stuff pretty freaking spot on
Okay.
in that episode that OpenAI ended up launching, though they did a better version of it with GPTs and stuff like that. But we talked a lot about the onboarding issues and retention issues that AI products have today,
Right.
and that was just like a lot of fun.
I'll throw out
But
one more. Can I throw out one
okay.
more? And it's actually just a recommendation. If you're interested in this topic about advancing your product career, I think we heard a lot of like contrarian and sort of interesting takes from Claire Vo, who's now
Yeah.
the CPO at Launch Darkly and at the time was CPO at Color. She has just taken a very different approach to building her product team and also building her own career, really focused on doing a lot of IC work. Everybody's a PM, that kind of stuff. And I just think her thoughts on it were really interesting and honestly kind of prescient. It's in this environment, even just a couple months, things change pretty rapidly. And I think she was on top of a lot of really interesting changes. So I'm going to end up referring to her conversation a lot today in our discussion, I think. So if you want the smarter version of it, just go back and listen to her say it herself.
That means spicy takes then if you're going to refer to that conversation. So
I hope so.
I appreciate that. Well, today we're going to talk through a few different things. This is the first time we're kind of recording this format live, and but we just wanted to welcome all of you. Hopefully you enjoy this episode as well as the podcast as a whole. We'll be kicking off season 2 of Unsolicited Feedback with this episode, and we have a bunch of different guests lined up along the way. And the topic that we really want to jam on today is how basically product careers are changing with all of the emerging technology and change in AI. And then we're gonna do something at the end we've never done, which is we'll take some solicited feedback, some Q&A. We collected some Q&A beforehand, but we'll take some live questions along the way as well, and we'll dive into that. But when we were prepping for this episode, we were like, oh man, like how are we gonna talk about this change in the AI world with AI with careers because things are changing so fast. And I think where we landed was we could talk through this through a few different frameworks that we've used in the past to talk through careers. We could talk through the framework of a T. We could talk through Robbie Mehta's product competency model. And I think we should also talk a little bit about viewing evolution and change by looking at things through the career ladder as well, because I think there's a bunch of emerging products that have some implications there. And so we figured that we'd start here a little bit. And I wrote this blog post over 10 years ago, which makes me feel unbelievably old. I also look back at this blog post and I'm like, oh my God, like there's some things that are cringeworthy in here that I would love to change. And I've always meant to go back and update it. But I've just got a little bit busy. But the
What's the
core
most
of this,
cringeworthy, Brian?
what's the most
Yeah.
cringeworthy? Ah, man, I don't know, just like some of the skills, I guess some of the skills that I put in here,
Okay.
I don't know.
It's
But
not the picture of yourself, is that?
we'll look at that incredible beard
Yeah,
and
I'm impressed.
nice little slick hair over. Like, yeah, I do look. Do I look 10 years younger there?
I, I, no comment.
Oh, okay. That's probably the right answer. That's probably the right answer. Um, so I wrote this blog post because essentially I never like it's not never like I went through any sort of formal training or learning for my career like in college. My majors were sports business and statistics, right? And I just like ended up in this world of growth and so I decided to write a post on how I thought about it as well as linked out to a bunch of different resources along the way. But the core of this post, the core of the framework, and then I'm interested in getting your take was how to think about shaping the different skill sets and topic areas in your career. And I think this applies to any career track, whether it's customer acquisition or product or whatever it might be. And that was like shaping yourself like a team. The core of that was essentially in any function like product or marketing or other pieces, there are a core set of topics that you want to go wide on. And the reason you want to go wide on those things is because those are the things that help you understand the function and discipline as a whole. It gives you context. It helps you understand strategy. It helps you understand how to connect, the functional strategy to the company strategy, like all of those pieces. It makes you, a fairly like versatile player. But you want to pair that with going incredibly deep on something as well, right? Like put yourself in the top, 10% of professionals out there on some really important skill set or topic within the function. And in marketing, that's typically you go really, really deep on a specific channel, SEO, paid acquisition, other pieces like other kind of channels like that. In product, it's a little bit different. In product, basically these different specializations of product have emerged over time, which, we wrote a blog post on this a while ago, but essentially what you find is that there's like core product managers focused primarily on producing core features. The growth specialization emerged over time. And then there's folks that are focused on like scaling infrastructure as well as product market fit expansion strategy. And you typically want to understand all of those domains, but go really like deep on this one. And as I started prepping for this, I was like, oh man, does the T change? Do you have to shape yourself something different in an AI world? Is that still the same and the skill sets just change underneath? So I'll pause there though, Fareed, and I'll get your take first on how looking at how careers and product specifically might evolve through this lens, like what might be different in your view.
Yeah, so I think there's two factors that I have a hard time teasing apart here that are changes in the outside world that are kind of happening at the same time. And I think one is the AI thing, right? Still early. ChatGPT is not even a year and a half old. And the other is, companies increasing focus on efficiency, team sizes, effectiveness, and ROI and profitability, kind of driving a change, I think, in terms of what we saw in the previous 3 or 4 eras is that you could be very successful in your career as a specialist, as a maybe not even that T-shaped, like an I-shaped person, because companies were adding a lot of heads, they were adding a lot of people, and they wanted the person who was the best at the one thing they were looking for. And they were okay with having, let's say in marketing, an SEO specialist and a social specialist and, organic SEO specialist, and like growing a marketing team across many, many, many specialists, email person, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're seeing, I think that's a second factor here that's, I think, hard to tease out because, again, they're happening at the same exact time. And so I don't know how much of it is AI driven versus not, but I do think that you have to be outcome driven in a world where certain executional skills are made really simple through AI tools, right? Is the way that I keep thinking about it and wrapping my head around it. It's like, if writing a doc is 100 times easier, or, analyzing a bunch of keywords, or, getting through a ton of customer feedback in a survey, suddenly the executional skills, like I know how to run a survey, become less important. And what becomes actually important is closing the loop on the whole thing. I'm really good at building customer driven products, is like the way I think about it. So I was trying to come up with shapes, and I was like, maybe O-shaped people, meaning like they can take a whole thing and finish it without a lot of like other specialists having to be involved. I don't know. That's kind of where my head is at around this. I think like the higher you go up the thoughts, the strategy stack, so to speak, the harder it is to be good at it, and the harder it is for AI tools to replace that behavior. And so your job has to be to get good at the deeper thinking and higher level planning strategy pieces of the puzzle versus the nuts and bolts of execution, which I think like start to get taken away slowly over time. What do you think about that, Brian? Does that seem right to you?
Yeah. So an analogy I heard the other day, and I'm blanking on who it was. Maybe it was you. I don't even know, but
I say a
was
lot of
that
things.
a lot of roles are going to shift to looking more like director roles,
Yeah.
right? Sorry, not like a director of product, but like think about like
Yeah.
directing a movie, right? Where and you worked at Pixar,
Yeah.
right? And so your role at Pixar, which was what exactly again? It was
So
like
I did a lot of like visual effects, and I was it was called the technical director. It's kind of like a half artist, half software engineer. I was way more on the software engineering side of it, but putting pixels on the screen and executing on things in the actual film. And that job is a good analogy because half the work is like grunt
probably gets eaten away.
worky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
grunt worky, like grind through detail stuff, right? That is just time consuming. And the other half is like hard creative thinking. How do I make something that's not easy to do possible to do? How do I make it look great? How do I have the taste to evaluate whether what I've done is high quality, fits into the look and feel of the film, whether it actually like tells the story, et cetera. And there's a whole layer of checks and balances to make sure that that happens. That all goes up to the film director. But at every layer, someone is giving creative feedback. And when I think about product management, there's like a whole bunch of like spin your wheels stuff. And I don't mean it's hard work. And I'm not trying to say that it's not like valuable, but like writing user stories, putting things into Jira, prioritizing bugs, making sure that like the right engineers are working on the right things at the right time, making sure things are being put into the company roadmap doc in the right place so that product marketing knows when it's going to release. And then there's the taste, the craft, the hard problems of, does this solve a customer problem? Does this solve a business problem? Those things are going to be harder to abstract, right? Like, or to replace through at least the current state of AI tools. I'm sure there are many people, maybe even on this call, who are like AI maximalists who believe that all of that work will be replaced too. But I think at least all we can do is plan for the next year or two. That's
That
the stuff
that
that
I
can't be changed.
that I think is actually really important. I've had a lot of conversations where people kind of go off into AI futurist land,
Yeah.
where they're trying to predict essentially what it's going to be like, when AGI takes over, or whatever it might be. And I think for practical purposes, in managing your career, the longer the time horizon, obviously the probability that you're correct on those predictions, or anybody is correct, just goes lower and lower. And so that's just like a bad way to think about managing your career and like what you need to do next. And so I think I've seen a lot of professionals kind of a little bit anxious about kind of what's going to happen to their career. And I think part of that anxiety just comes from all of the unknowns and the speed of change. And I think kind of scoping that down a little bit more to looking at it through the lens of the next year or two, and actually just being really open and willing to consistently change and evolve versus like choosing the thing that is going to have some sort of permanency,
Yeah.
long term, is probably the right way to mold yourself and manage yourself through a lot of this constant change. Otherwise, like there's going to be a lot of like back and forth on, oh my God, did I like choose the right thing to bet on, and all of that kind of stuff along the way. And so I think looking at it through the next year or two, right? I think one of the things you can try to understand is, well, what is AI really good at today? What is it getting better at really quickly? And then like what is the thing like right beyond that, right? And to what you're talking about, right? What a lot of people talk about is AI is actually really good at things like executing like type one thinking, things that are kind of spur of the moment in our brain. And like the best example of this is like if I ask you what's 2 by 2, you're just going to spit out 4, right? You're not like actually doing math in your head.
Right.
You're not like thinking through the actual steps of the problem. But if I ask you like what's 132 times 84 divided by 3, like you're going to sit down and like think through some stuff. And that kind of that's where kind of AI is not great right now, but is getting actually better very quickly. And so you can think about this spectrum on that, like type 1 to complexity of strategic problems, or type 2 thinking. And it's essentially like the more steps in the strategic thought, right, the less good AI is going to be at that
Yeah.
right now, right? And so a lot of, I think, the what you're talking about, the tasks and the pieces that you're talking about is right now, like executing, like writing subject lines and copies of emails, or writing PRDs and all that kind of stuff. Right now, the tools are really good at probably getting you to like an 80% version, right? And so as a result, those things are going to become, they are much more efficient for PMs. And just doing those things well, we're very quickly moving to a world where just doing those things well is not going to like get you ahead, those baseline tasks. Because the next step of this, those things are going to, the tools are going to get to doing those types of tasks at like 99, 98, 99% right level, like pretty damn, pretty damn close to 100%. And so you got to like move across that spectrum to like, what are the types of problems and outcomes that I can like get good at delivering, that require like more complexity, more steps, because
Mhm.
that's where the creativity and trade-offs and context and all of these things have to like come together, to make a really, really good decision. And so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about. But anyways, like,
Yeah.
yeah, your point
I
on next year to two as the scope is, I
Yeah.
think, really, really key.
So two things that came to mind for me that I think are also important, specific things that I think product people in particular need to spend their time and energy on. The first is um, under technical thinking and understanding the technology behind LLMs and AI tools. And I don't think this means learn to write code, because I actually think that's one of those type one things that's like kind of going away. It is learning to reason and understand about what these tools are good at and not good at. I've seen a lot of like, I think there's a lot of things. If you don't understand what they're great at and what they're not good at, you're not going to be able to use these products to deliver great outcomes. This is not as simple as like, I think there was a whole realm of product management, especially for consumer products and a lot of SaaS, where it wasn't really about, is this technically feasible? It was about like, can we build a great user experience? Can we identify enough customers? Can we go to market properly? And so you didn't have to think about the technology of it much, except for to understand basic scope, small, medium, large, how expensive is this to build? And you could rely on your engineering teams to do that. But when there is new technology, there's sort of two ways to think about products, right? There's top down, like here's a customer problem. Let me identify how we're going to solve it, which is, I think, the way most products are built. And there's bottoms up, which is the technology has these certain capabilities that are really, really interesting and valuable and good. And how do we connect the dots to a meaningful and important customer problem on the other side? Because there are certain top-down things that it's actually going to do badly, right? Like customer problems you think AI is a fit for, but it actually turns out they're bad. And you need to guide that. And also there might be things you didn't think of because if you don't understand what the technology is good at, you can't connect the dots to interesting customer problems. And I think this is important. And I think a lot of product development advice for the past like decade or so has really been top down. Start with the customer problem, go find the technology. And I think a lot of that was a response to, in lean startup and other things, technology in search of problems. But I think LLMs are obviously useful, right? ChatGPT has proved that. It can solve a wide range of different things, but it solves certain things 10x better than other things. And so like without a deep understanding of how this stuff works and what it's good at and actually tinkering and playing with it and using it yourself, I don't think you can be an effective product leader, certainly for AI type products, but let's assume that there's LLMs powering all kinds of stuff in the future. You probably have to be good at this otherwise. So that's one. The second piece of advice I've come to with this is the attachment that your career growth is correlated with the number of people you manage probably needs to go away. And I think this is one I'm having a hard time separating the AI thing from the like economy thing. But I think that in this world, at least in the next year, it is, if you assume that these tools work, if you assume that there will be more and more of them directed at people like us building products, right? Either a co-pilot for, generating code much faster with smaller teams, or ways to analyze data really effectively that you didn't have before, or being able to build designs and prototype much more effectively. We need to find ways to align career growth with complexity of problem growth as you decide. The thing you were saying, Brian, is that like the hard stuff is the stuff up the ladder. How many steps is it? How strategically minded are you? We need to find ways to think about our career ladders as rising in complexity, not in number of humans we manage. And this is something that Claire talked about a lot in her episode. And it just has really resonated with me recently. Because I just don't think you need teams of 108 product managers to solve interesting problems in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to your first point because one of the questions that I've gotten is like, is the specialization of an AI PM going to be a thing? Right. And like, is it a thing? And I think it's an important question because I think like all the influencers out there, like they want to like make everything a specialization just to like make a thing, like
because then you can sell a thing,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Like the PM for the blue buttons, right? I don't know what the specialization would be. And so, and I think my short answer to what we were saying earlier is like, think about this over the next couple of years is I actually think yes. I think, and I'm actually pretty pessimistic and skeptical on like all the, like everything becoming a core specialization. And so my thought process here is like, okay, well, let's first evaluate like why the growth PM became a thing, right? Like like a core specialization. I think it was kind of three things. One is that basically problem areas emerged that were highly impactful to software businesses, most software businesses that were best solved with software that weren't otherwise being solved for teams. So things around user activation and churn and leveraging software to drive acquisition, like all those types of things. Two is like to solve those problems effectively required a slightly different skill set than how core PMs were like kind of tooled like to that point. And then the third was that it actually required the best way to solve those problems. It required new approaches, different types of development processes, different methods to solve those problems, right? So fast experimentation models, using different versions of like A/B testing and multivariate testing over kind of your traditional like agile sprint type of process. And I think all three of those things are actually true over the next couple of years for AI as well, especially as existing companies transition to this. So one is like, do new core problems, like customer problems emerge that are highly impactful to like most businesses? And I think the answer is yes, right? Like AI is going to touch almost any kind of software or technology business. Two, does it require new skills to like go solve those problems or new knowledge and topic areas? And I think 100% yes is, and I'll talk about that in a second of why, right? Like you talked a little bit about that of like, you need to like understand what this stuff is capable of to connect it to the customer problem. And then three is like requiring new approaches and development processes. And this is something that as Reforge has been getting into and building more stuff, as we're realizing actually we have to approach our development a little bit differently as well. So two problems that have emerged. One is that getting the typical customer feedback on a design prototype just flat out doesn't work with anything that's Gen AI product, because the customer feedback you get is like, well, it kind of depends on what this thing generates for me, right? which you can't capture in a typical customer like design prototype, which you could in like a SaaS software, especially with interactive prototypes, kind of clicking through the experience, like all that kind of stuff. And so solving that is like requiring us to develop new methods approaches. The second thing is creating benchmark experiences is like a whole new thing for us. So part of the challenge here is that anytime you make a change to the underlying technology, the model, like the user experience, right, is like you don't necessarily know how this manifests, for every single individual user, right? Because it's just like generating, like something new every single time. And so what a lot of companies have done is had to go create these benchmark experiences, right? So a simple example of this would be, let's say you're creating an AI experience to help your customers solve, a bunch of product support questions for you. This is like one of the most classic examples, right? A benchmark data set would be you take 50 50 question sets that you might get from users. You make a change to the product or the underlying model. You then look at those 50 benchmark questions and evaluate and assess them. Like, is this better or worse, right? Than the previous experience. That's like a whole new thing that is
kind of
not
like qualitative A/B testing over a like standard set of inputs or something like that. That's super interesting.
And I think like a whole set of methodologies and approaches to doing that are going to actually end up emerging. And I think these things have existed in like other
ML
kind of more niche
areas
of like ML modeling and stuff like that. But now you take those things and you basically are applying it to a way larger surface area, right? And so I think all of these things are gonna mean as like companies go through these transitions, there is an opportunity to really specialize as a PM, in AI, right? And help, the company usher through these things. I think the question long term is just like, is all software powered by AI? And as a result, like, is it not a specialization? It's just like a core competency, like a expectancy. But once again, like focusing on the next couple of years, I do think I do think that there's an opportunity here to go deep on this and specialize and stand out.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of scary advice to hear, and I don't know exactly what the answer to it is. Like we're talking about focus on the next 12 to 18 months because we have no idea what can be, possible. Um, this is probably true because like some other company will just build the feature you built and your features will be obsolete. So just deliver customer value in the next 6 to 12 months, but also true for your own career. But this makes me think like, is the advice we're giving everybody dogpile into the like 2 or 3 AI PM roles that are offered at different companies right
Oof.
now? And like everybody wants those, and anyone who's in another type of PM role, like, or marketing role feels like they're, just sitting on the sidelines. Like, I don't think I
That
mean,
can't be the
that's probably
answer,
part
right?
of the
Like,
advice, but it
yeah.
can't be the answer, right? And so I think it's a little tricky because I think some companies that I've talked to are doing this sort of uh all AI is in an AI product group kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
We think there's value in centralizing the technology, thought processes, et cetera, like old school growth teams. We need to have them go do that. There's another approach that I've heard called the like red team, blue team thing, which is like blue team means everybody on existing product teams is building their own roadmaps and they are thinking about how AI driven features, products, and experiences can improve the things they are already responsible for, right? So I'm not changing my mandate to build AI stuff for customers. It's like, let's say I'm at Instacart and I work on the catalog team and I want to like write way better descriptions for every single product. I can just go do that. And then the red team side is like, our job is to think, if I were a startup disrupting this company using AI and was going to eat our lunch, how would I do it? And so that's like a different kind of, I think, AI product building, 0 to 1, way more experimental, off the ground. I think if you're at one of those companies and I think most companies should probably operate that way, every product team has the opportunity to ask the question, how can I use AI? And at minimum, you should be able to use AI in your internal processes and your internal ways of working in order to be more effective. Like make yourself 10x, right? So I don't think it's just work on AI products. It is make your own systems better, write better product briefs because of it, play around with prototyping tools. There's some amazing stuff about creating UIs out of like natural language and whole cloth to like pitch products. Data analysis is another one. Like, oh, you're an okay SQL writer, like become a great SQL writer, and like drive data insights that other people wouldn't be able to have. I think it's not just go be work on AI products. It's like find ways to be a blue team, basically. I think is the best
Mm.
advice I can give because these AI roles are probably the most competitive at any company, right? If you say like product manager, principal product manager, comma, AI products, and post that on the internet, like everybody wants that job, right?
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that's fair. And I think like in any company like that, like even in Reforge, we have a couple PMs that are sort of leading the way on this. But we're highly encouraging all of the other PMs to essentially bring in, possible solutions and stuff using AI into their product areas, but they aren't necessarily kind of like leading the way on the whole piece of it. One thing I did want to return to, because there's questions like you mentioned, is like you got to understand kind of how the technology works to connect to the customer problems. And I think in a lot of people's heads that leads to things like, well, I gotta like, learn a bunch about machine learning or Python and all that kind of stuff. And I actually do not think that is the case. Like I do not think those are the things to go learn, right? And so I think the things to go learn are essentially all of the different like methods, like the different methods and strategies that influence and manifest different customer experiences and different possibilities for the customers. And I'll give you an example. Some people might think this is a basic example, depending on how deep you're on AI right now. But one of the common methods right now to give an LLM access to some, specific knowledge source, right? Whether that's your customer support docs or maybe you're a financial product, right? And you have a bunch of financial content, right? Is this called RAG, like retrieval augmented generation, right? And you're essentially
I'm glad you
connecting this.
didn't quiz me on what that stood for.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. You're basically connecting, you're basically, it's kind of like connecting like an external library, specialized library to a brain,
Yeah.
like the LLM. And
Yeah, it's a way to create better prompts using external data, basically. You
yeah,
like feed it into the LLM. Yep.
but within that, there's tons of different like little levers and things that you can change that fundamentally change the experience, right? So an example is one of the things that you do in this method is that you take this external knowledge source and you basically have to chunk it up into different sized pieces, right? Because what it does is it takes a chunk of that external knowledge source, it includes it in a prompt for an LLM to give the LLM the context, right, along with like some kind of request, like can you answer a question on this using like this context? And the thing right now with the LLMs is like the amount of context you can give it is limited, and actually the more you give it, at some point like the quality decreases. And so one of the strategies here is you split all this external knowledge into all of these different size pieces, and the size of the pieces that you create and how you create those size pieces actually fundamentally change what the output looks like to the end user. And there's all sorts of different techniques kind of emerging around this. And so that's like one small example within the whole thing. And so, when looking at like a benchmark data set and being like, for some reason, this is like not pulling the most relevant results, over here that I know exists, right? That's possibly due to the way that you are like splitting up your external knowledge source and chunking your knowledge source. And so you got to help the team like connect, those dots to a certain degree, but that doesn't require, going and learning Python or designing like an ML algorithm. And so I think these are like some of the areas that folks, I just want to call out, like folks need to kind of like go deep on along the way. Fareed, one thing I wanted to do is like we're talking a lot in generalities, but I just did want to connect it to something super concrete.
Yeah.
Ravi Mehta, he was a chief product officer at Tinder a while back. He's done a bunch of other things. He has this competency model. If you've searched anything, you probably come across it. And he's got all these different skill sets for product managers. And, the shape of this, like where you spike essentially changes as your role like
Right.
changes. This is kind of like how he's mapped it out as an example. So I'm interested, like when you look at these quadrants, which ones do you think are, connecting to all of our earlier conversation, which quadrant are the ones that you're like, like this is where I want to go deeper, and which ones are like the ones that you think just like kind of get eroded away?
Okay. I have some hypotheses, but push back on them. The first is I think that product strategy remains important and probably the most important, even at more junior roles and levels of positioning inside of companies, because if you believe that the leverage that you can get out of a small team increases, what will become more important is not it will be how do I best use and best leverage this team. And that really ends up being about how can I position my team to have the highest strategic impact? How can I present a compelling vision? How can I own business outcomes and drive success? So that's my opinion on the product strategy one. I think it either stays, it's either a hold or a buy. Like it's either more important or it's at least a hold. And I actually think, just go to the next slide. There's a couple of these where that's like your little spiky thing.
Oh, the image. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like here it says like APMs, PM, senior PM are sort of low on that side. I just think if you think about the dynamics of both, again, the economy and AI in the same time, that's going to be what you expect out of everybody. It's going to be really hard to be like not thinking deep, like about product strategy and be successful in an organization. So that's one. The second one I have sort of a 50-50 on. Can you go back to the other?
Yeah.
I can't figure out if the customer insight thing becomes more important or less important. And here's my thinking. This is really about data, customer interviews, voice of the customer, et cetera.
Mm.
Lot of tools here to make
Oh,
this a lot
totally.
easier.
That's
Like
yeah, 100%.
we,
Yeah.
we were using Gong to like be able to look at every single sales conversation that's ever happened, or a tool like Grain to look at every customer interview. There's tons of stuff around, getting the things you always wish you had, like sentiment analysis, like, really like high value quotes out of your surveys, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff is so much easier to do. Same with data, writing SQL, querying stuff, like getting insights, look at this data set and tell me interesting things. So I think the executional aspects of that, like I used to give every PM the advice that the number one thing you can do if you want to be successful, especially in a startup, is learn SQL, because now you're an answerer of a question instead of an asker of a question. And that's like a really valuable thing to be, because you're a creator of insights. I think the advice is the same. Be a creator of insight, be a
Mm.
creator of opportunity, be an answerer of questions. But I don't think that lies in the technical skill of writing SQL or being really good at designing a high quality NPS survey. It's instead around being able to glean the right insights from it. So again, that one's like weird, like half of it becomes less important. But again, same thing as in product strategy, the strategic thinking, insight generation, what do I do with this, becomes more important. That's my sort of look on that one. Those are the two that stood out to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the yeah, I've been thinking about that related to these like voice of customers tools too, that like do like auto analysis of all of the customer responses. And like, well, first, let's be honest, every team likes to say that they talk to customers, and the ones that do it on a consistent basis is probably a much smaller fraction of that. So to some degree, like these tools will at least like increase increase that percentage of folks who, because the work is becoming more efficient. But I think that like the conversation earlier is like the the best insights I've ever gotten around product are kind of reading through just the rawness of it and like trying to like understand the texture and the nuance around it. And I wonder if how much we lose that, in these tools, or maybe they're just like so freaking good at it. They get so good at it that it actually helps you get to that nuance without introducing our problem as humans, which is the bias.
Yeah. Okay. So let's like tinker on this data and insight thing.
Okay.
I feel like one of the reasons why knowing SQL, for instance, in a traditional product work is a superpower is that the feedback loop from I have a thought to I have an answer goes down a lot, right? So you can iterate and you can test and you can try things really quickly. So imagine I had a question about the participants of this Zoom, and I had to go ask an analyst about it and be like, hey, I'd love to see the geographic breakdown of the people that were in this Zoom and look at a bunch of other factors. And the first thing they'd ask is, hey, is that more important than the other stuff I'm working on? And you'd be like, no, not really. So you'd skip it and you wouldn't do it at all. If I could do it myself, I would just get it done in 2 minutes. It doesn't have to go in a queue. It doesn't have the overhead of an organizational thing. And now I can answer a question. And then I can ask the next question. Oh, why are there so many people from Amsterdam in this call? And then I could ask the question about how we marketed it and look at the LinkedIn data, and I can dig down and I can get to an aha that I wouldn't have otherwise been accessible to because of the shortness of the feedback loop. So my thought is there's no replacement for reading the raw material of like qualitative customer feedback, but it's been really hard to do that. Ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, get an answer, drill down,
Mhm.
because it's just too much text. And like survey stuff is really tricky to get right because of statistics and all those sorts of things. And so maybe if you wanted to get really good at that, your job is to learn how to use the tools to get to the right quotes, to get to the right real raw individuals. So anyway, just the thought about it is like,
That's fair.
I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by the idea of being able to like ask structured, not quite SQL, but like structured query type questions of unstructured data and get like insights back. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for someone to lean into. The way like being really good at analyzing growth data became a superpower. I think there might be something there around qualitative insight
Yeah.
as well.
I do like the high level framing of like, you know, become a creator of insights. And I think some of this tooling is going to reduce a lot of the friction to becoming a creator versus, an asker of it, I guess. But one thing that keeps bouncing on around in my head, kind of looking at this, is like, are we just saying entry level roles go away? I mean, let me just put that out there for a second, because it's certainly happening. Like, I've seen in other functions, startups pop up that are basically like your AI version of an SDR, which is an entry level role in sales, or like even in marketing, a lot of like the executional tasks that a very entry level marketer, right, would typically like take on. Um, are being like pushed to like to different tools. And I ask that because, to your point, yes, yes, the strategic, the complex problems, all that kind of stuff is really important. But the reason that doesn't necessarily exist at the entry level is that those things, like anything, you need more reps to get better at something, and those things have long feedback
Yeah.
cycles, right? And so it takes a while to accrue, being part of those feedback cycles, like seeing the game tape, right? And so it's not like you can just like, graduate college or whatever, like enter a function and like have those skill sets. Like, you still need to get the reps at seeing the game tape and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
but I can't imagine like quote unquote entry levels like go away. So I don't know. I'm interested in,
I think
like, do you have any takes on that?
Okay, so let's just like look at it in the next 12 to 18 months. For both economic and AI reasons, there's certainly going to be a push for most companies. I've seen so many job recs, so many people come to me and say, hey, I really need like a product manager who's senior enough to run a team by themselves on an important strategic problem, and that's who I'm hiring. I'm not hiring junior people right now. And I think that's actually pretty common, right? But I think the place where you're really going to get squeezed, and I think this is what somebody just said in the chat, is like
Yeah.
middle management and product management. Because if like
Mm.
each PM is like more independent, more able to get work done without having team, and you don't need so many layers for almost any company up to like a product design and engineering org of like, let's say 400 or 500 people, you can imagine a world with a head of product and a bunch of product managers. And that's it. Now that squeezes the bottom because each PM has a lot of responsibility, and it squeezes the middle because like there's no world for like, oh, my job is to people manage and influence people around a product area that has 3 people on it, which used to be very, very common and still is. So I think there's something to that. I don't think entry level roles go away. I think the shape of what they will be asked to do is different. So instead of like entry level PM be like, copy this product brief into user stories in Jira and like be a glorified project manager, it might be more like, go understand this, like do senior PM work, go understand this complex
Yeah.
customer problem and identify opportunities. And maybe you have a peer mentor that helps you succeed at that. Um, I think that's good, would be true even without AI, just because of the dramatic bloat in team sizes that we've seen over the past like 3 to 4 years. I think it's just exacerbated by it. At least that's my guess. I think in the near term, though, I think it's going to be harder and harder to get. I mean, I think I don't know if any company is running their APM program at scale right now, which is kind of worrisome.
Yeah, I do think that's an interesting point. And Alethea, who mentioned this same thing in the chat, right? The middle management thing. It's a great and we did talk about this with Claire Vo too. And so I do think in the next couple of years, I think there's going to be a push, and there's also an opportunity for folks that were in that mid-level management to basically become very senior ICs, right? And so like at the principal staff, or whatever level. And that's what we've also shifted Reforge totally to, as well, is that we've really started to orient the company around what we call captains, these very senior ICs, and we really eliminated the like not eliminated totally, but reduced the number of what we call coach roles, people who are purely coaching from the sidelines. And I think to the earlier point, like that very senior IC track, you're still getting the reps of the game tape, the
Yeah.
strategic problems and like all that kind of stuff that are important to, eventually maybe shift over into the limited number of like coach and in management roles like in the future. But I do think we're going to see a lot of that conversion happen like here in the interim
Yeah.
as part of that as well. So
Yeah. If you're a GPM or a director inside of a large company and most of your job is on the influencing people management and maybe like, a little bit of product feedback stuff, I'd go find something to work on, like a project. I'd like go listen
creating
to
stuff. Yeah.
Claire's,
Yeah.
go listen to Claire's podcast, learn how she as a CPO actually has IC work that she does, and go try to replicate that. Like, don't take the most important project away from someone on your team. That's bad management, but go find something that you're like building, because I think like ultimately your resilience in an organization will be around one, how valuable people think you are, but also like what you're responsible for delivering, probably individually. And the better the people are on your team, the the more risk I think there is there. So go find some good work to do. Maybe that's the right advice. I've been thinking about this a lot as I think about what I want to be doing in my career, and um, being close
Yeah.
to the metal on building has risen dramatically in terms of its importance in my stack rank of things
Yeah.
that matter to me.
Yeah, I do think that, part of like career opportunities are also kind of dictated by like how companies organize themselves, right? And I think this is going to be a hard this we are going through the hard shift for existing companies, right? This is kind of like where you see a lot of the layoffs and all that kind of stuff. But I think as like it sounds like Alethea in the chat is a founder, is like sounds like she's structured their company around this. And I think you're going to see a lot of startups do that, right? Is they're going to structure their companies around like some of these like principles. And those are the opportunities like of the future, right? Because those organizations are going to be developed and structured like this from the bottoms up versus going through this conversion. And I think it's a painful change for a lot of folks, especially folks who, have taken those roles and taken some bets on that kind of, as part of their career. And like, I think the unfortunate tough love is like, doesn't fucking matter. Like shit changes. Like at the end of the day, it's like shit changes. The environment changes. You like evolve with it, right? And in the closer, I think that the sooner you kind of like accept that reality and honesty and all of those types of things, the better. I also just side note, I think the creation work is way more fun and satisfying than the management work. That's me personally. I don't know why so many people wanted to be middle managers,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, it's just like a lot of sucking, right? Like, rather than satisfaction. So, anyways,
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, no, it's so hard to tell people, to remind people of this, but like, do you really want to spend a whole 2 months of your year writing performance reviews? Like, is that how you want to spend your life? uh, but
people pointed out it was more money, right?
Yeah,
Which is true. There's
more
like
money.
I've talked about this before. Is like incentives need to change. Incentives will change in the ecosystem. If this is
Yeah.
correct. So
I think
yeah,
you're starting to see it. I mean, look, engineering has always had this two-track
yeah,
path. And in companies where deep technical expertise is necessary and important, there are IC engineers who can make as much money and equity as any manager at any level, which is, I think, an important piece of the puzzle as we think about the incentive alignment here. I know, Brian, you on a previous episode suggested that should maybe even pay ICs more than managers to bring the point really home
I think
at
so.
director and
Yeah,
senior levels.
100%. Yeah,
Um, I think you're gonna see I think the principal product manager as a title is going to be an emerging trend over the next couple of years. I've seen a lot more posts for it. I will say, like at most companies I've worked at, senior PM was the terminal IC role. Like it usually goes senior group. And maybe there were like one or two, like, IC-ish group PMs, right? That owned something important. But like if you wanted to be a director, VP, et cetera, you had to manage people. And that meant adding a lot of people to your team. So the incentives are aligned around make this sub problem I work on as important enough to add enough people to grow into that role so I can hit my promotion. I think we're going to start seeing more of it. I mean, I've been surprised by, as I just like search around on LinkedIn and take a look at the job market, the number of like very senior principal IC type roles that I see out there.
Yeah. All right, we got about 30 minutes left, and I think we should get into the Q&A part of it. So we have some folks that submitted some questions beforehand, which we'll kick off on, but would love to take some questions in the chat as well. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in. If you asked it before, I have not been monitoring the chat. It's just like too many things going on my screen. So feel free to copy and paste and re-ask the question.
Yeah, and we'll use the Q&A instead of chat for questions, Brian.
Oh, okay.
Those should all be stuck there. You'll see the button on the bottom. But also, folks, upvote the questions. There's upvoting is enabled on Q&A. So upvote the ones that you think are interesting. 30 minutes sometimes turns into 3 answers. So, we'll try to get to the ones that have the most votes around them first.
Wait,
but we have a couple
just
of
for folks, where
questions.
is this Q&A feature? And by folks, I mean me.
There's a button at the bottom of the bottom bar. You're sharing your screen. So you see the little like annoying top. I hate describing Zoom product to people out loud. Okay, close that. There's the button bar at the bottom. One of them has a little red dot that has a 10 on it that says Q&A. Click on that.
Oh, got it. Okay. That just looked like a chat thing. So, all right, let's kick off.
Do we want to do pre-submitted questions first, or do we want to do live audience?
I just want to I just want to reiterate one. So one of the questions we had was, as AI continues to evolve, what strategies or approaches would you recommend to PMs and leaders to future-proof the roles and ensure they remain indispensable? And I just kind of want to reiterate the point is like, I don't think there is future-proofing your career, right? Like I've had to reinvent myself multiple times throughout my career. Fareed, I know you've done the same as well, right?
Yeah.
Like I got into product, very early. I then got into this whole like growth scene through like the social gaming days. I then shifted more, to like reinventing myself as a CEO, which is quite different. So I think the only future proofing is getting better and better at like, learning to learn, reinventing yourself like along the way and having that willingness to do it, because I do think the cycles of reinvention probably accelerate, right? Like the people entering their career today probably will need to reinvent themselves more times than you and I had, right? Had to Fareed along the way. Anything to add to?
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine I worked at Slack, and I'm sure she got this from somewhere else. Julia Grace used to say, hey, careers are jungle gyms, not ladders, right? You kind of like are hopping around the thing and jumping from thing to thing. And like, hopefully you're getting further up and advancing and growing your career in some meaningful way. But the idea that you're just going to go one rung at a time from like L3 to L4 to L5 to L6 to M1 to M2 or whatever it is probably like, it is a path to the Peter principle, like hitting the point of your most incompetence or whatever. But if you follow not just the market, but your passions and what's interesting to you and companies you find interesting, like your career growth is a function of both your skills and the environment you're in. I think Bengali coined as like skills times opportunity or something. I don't remember exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be finding the matches. And so for me, I've gone from a VP of product to a IC senior PM because the opportunity at the company seemed good. I've had one of those moves fail. I've had one of them succeed. I've done 3-4 different types of jobs. And part of it is like following what's exciting, working with people I think are great, working on products I care about, and with the trust and betting on yourself that you will be able to grow and be successful in those if you're in the right environment with the right, soil, water, et cetera, for things to grow. And I think it's really a really important one. And I agree with you. The pathway for that is changing. I don't think that means changing jobs more frequently.
Yes,
I think that
it's
means
a good point.
taking sequential bets that are a good fit and then leaning into them till they're provably working or not working. The goal is to stay with a place for a long time, I would say. Like I don't
Yeah.
know. I try to choose every role as like, can I see myself being here in 10 years? Because it turns out 10 years is more like 4. If you look at it as a 4-year, it's probably more like 1. So, you might
Yeah.
as well take the long view.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some of these questions. Michael Kraft asked, Fareed, you talked about playing and tinkering with the LLMs in order to be an effective product leader. Where to start? Being a chat GPT prompt whiz doesn't feel sufficient, even though you could add that to the byline of your LinkedIn any day.
No, I am not a GPT prompt whiz. So
We
the
could create
best
like a
thing,
wizard hat,
yeah.
for you with like little AI thing. Yeah. So, like,
Um, I I think you have to find a project. Like this is the same way, like how do you learn to code? Like build a website you're interested in, or build a project. I think it's the same with this. And there's some stuff you can do inside your job, but I think there's some that you need, but that's hard because you're under time pressure. So you're in a situation where you're like, okay, let me try and write, a technical spec using ChatGPT. Oh, it's not really working. Screw it. I'm going to go do it myself. Right. I think what's interesting is to try to really finish something and do it as a side project. So I'll just use an example of one I did recently. Okay, Brian's gonna laugh. I play a lot of golf. One of my the running debates in the golf community is like, are handicaps broken? And do they help like the low handicap or the high handicap? Anyway, I had a thought in my mind. This is where the strategic thing is. I had a thought in my mind. You could write a simulation to simulate matches of people with different handicaps using some input data and figure out if like what's fair, what's not fair. But I will tell you, I can write this code by myself, but it would take a long time and I wouldn't get it right. So what I did was I was like, let me just try and finish this project using GPT as my helper. And I actually used a bunch of stuff. I grabbed data off the internet and had it scrape the images. I had it write the code. Turns out it wrote the wrong code. But like, because I have enough input to know that, I was like, hey, I think you made a mistake here. And it was like, oh, you're right. Let me fix it. Like again, and when you get into this rhythm of actually trying to finish something that actually works and is correct, you learn a ton about what it's good at and what it's not good at, right? So
yeah.
it is good at writing code when you tell it exactly what to do. It is good at breaking down a process. It makes lots of mathematical errors, like simple, like we're talking like first year stats type stuff, right? So like there's things like that where you learn like, oh, what do I have to be good at in order to direct this very smart first year intern how to do the right job. And so I think it's about finding a project. Sorry, I didn't mean to like go off on a tangent about my silly project, but I think it's
I know you
illustrative.
like to talk about golf. Yes,
I
I know
do.
you
This is
like to talk
golf
about golf.
and data and code. It's like the three things I love the most in one place. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look, I think Michael, so I've just I've been on my own journey on this for I would say probably the past few months. And so I can kind of just, one is yes, Reforge has some courses on AI, specific parts of AI. They're definitely good. They're definitely worth it if you want to look at them and see where it's at. But I do think nothing kind of replaces the creation. I think the courses just kind of reduce the amount of time that you need to do to go, um, synthesize and structure, the source knowledge, right? But it doesn't replace creation at the same time. So I went through a journey myself over the past few months. One is I kind of did what Fareed was doing is I just played around with a bunch of products. I tried a bunch of stuff to try to get a sense of like what it was good at, what they were bad at. And I didn't know why they were good at certain things and why they were bad at certain things. Right. But that then like basically gave me some interesting color and context and examples to think about because the second thing I went and did is I just started reading a bunch of the core research papers. And people, at first I thought these were going to be like research papers, as like you find research in like biomed and stuff like that. And it's like, no, 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 no. These are easier to consume. They aren't the most exciting things, but they are easier to consume than that world of stuff. And I do think that what the research papers do well is they tend to succinctly say, like, here's the problem, here's the solution we tried, and here's the improvement we made. And as I started reading through those, I start to able to map those things to like understanding like the things that I personally tinkered with, of like what was good and what was bad. I was like, oh, now I understand why this thing I was doing, like it was really bad at that. But here's a new method emerging. It's like interesting to see, like it might be really good at that, like at some day. And then the third part of it, kind of after I went through all those research papers, there's two other parts. I turned it into this epic Notion file of just like recasting what I learned back to others, like pretending I have now shared this epic Notion file with a bunch of folks. But it was good.
We have a request for you to share it with everyone
Yeah, I
here
knew
now.
I shouldn't have said that. Like it's just me putting it back in my own words, which helped. Like, so I was just like kind of pretending I was teaching somebody else on this. And then the fourth part, which I moved into, is now starting to, with that knowledge, start to build some things. Now I've mostly right now, just because of time limitations, I'm building stuff with things that are more no codey. Zapier is probably like a good platform for that. So I'm just kind of like building my own chatbot, connecting it to an external knowledge source, playing with the different prompting methodologies like chain of thought and all that kind of stuff to see like the before afters, like all that kind of stuff. Now that's like a limited, it's like a limited approach to it, but those are kind of the steps that I've walked through personally. And if I had more time,
Yeah.
I would then maybe help
It,
get some help writing some code and build
if you
some
know a
more
lot about
specific.
Reforge or Brian, that is like the most Brian Balfour like approach to understanding a problem I've ever heard. Pro tip, uh, ChatGPT knows a lot about AI research papers, like a ton, and is very good at explaining them and describing them. So if you do crack open one of these and reading the raw text of it is like not working for you, either because there's too much math or it's too technical or whatever, you can actually just like say, please summarize this paper, and give it some input into like what level you want it to understand. So like my prompts are always, I am a person with a computer science degree and a basic understanding of technical concepts, but no understanding of LLMs and AI, specialty understanding of AI, LLMs and AI. Please summarize these three papers for me. And it actually does a really good job of like not summarizing it at like too dumb a level or too smart a level. And then if it does, you can adjust it. You can be like, I don't understand what you mean by this word. Can you go into more depth? And it's been really nice for like understanding the core of this stuff without, and also about finding the papers. Like it's good at that too. It's like, you can say like, what are the most seminal works on problem X? So
Yeah.
like, for instance, like I didn't know what a transformer was for a long time, which like is like how this stuff all works. And so I was just like, you can ask the questions you're afraid to ask your friends, right? So what's a transformer and why does it matter? That kind of stuff. So yeah, it's sort of a closed loop here. And you
Yeah.
learn more and more about it and you end up using it more.
All right, let's go through some of these. We got to cut ourselves off, go through a little bit quicker. Josh asked, with fewer layers in the PM org, what does the path look like to transition from IC, senior PM, to leadership role, like a VP of product? I think this always depends on the size of company. That kind of relates to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier. And I think the one thing that I want to quantify here is that, like, you don't have to be a manager to be a leader, right? Like I think that's the thing, is like, the most influential leaders in Reforge are actually ICs. They are the ones on the front lines, leading the solving of the most complex problems. It's just that we've removed what we call the coaching responsibilities away from them. We've removed a lot of the like hiring responsibilities, like positioning positioning players on the field, managing essentially keeping an eye on like team health, like all the kind of stuff. Those are kind of in the like few coaching roles that we have. And so I think it really depends on the type of leadership that that you're like talking about here. But I just want to make that point is that you can be a leader in IC roles. And it was the same thing at HubSpot. The most senior ICs were in a lot of ways the most influential people because they were the creator of insights and solutions to use kind of Fareed's words from before. But I do think what the future probably looks more like is there's more of these opportunities for principal staff, whatever you want to call them, type of IC roles in product. And those will give you the reps at some of like the strategic, like complex problems. And those will then have be the jumping off point into more of the management roles versus the typical progression through the middle management of GPM and stuff like that. But it takes a while for the ecosystem to change, right? So,
Yeah.
but that's the thing is like you want to bet on a rising trend, not a declining trend. Is even though like a lot of this stuff exists in the interim. So, Fareed, anything to add to that?
Not really. I think that's the main point I wanted to add on was the thing you said at the end, which was like, we're given this advice and we're thinking about long-term trends, but what's the Warren Buffett quote? Like the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay liquid or whatever. And I think that's true for careers in some ways too. Like I think it's probably true that there's a lot less middle management in the long term. But is that the most durable decision in the near term? It's going to be hard, and it's going to be really dependent on your individual company and what they value. But the fact is team sizes are going to be smaller than they were in the last 3 to 4 years. Important business problems are still important. And you should lean into places where owning something valuable that has real customer impact. I think that's always going to be high value. And I would gravitate towards those things.
Random question that just popped in my head. Do you think the growth specialization has become more durable or less durable?
So I think there's an interesting lesson here around this, which is there was a time when growth was its own department in a lot of companies, right? It wasn't marketing, it wasn't product, it was growth, and it had its own, head of, and it had its own like chief growth officers were a thing. That's still kind of a thing, et cetera. And what you've seen is as more and more companies have realized growth is really important. It requires coordination between all of our teams to be successful. It requires like growth minded thinking in our product. We can't just build a thing and ask someone else to sell it. What you've seen is growth in the product org as a discipline, growth in the marketing org as a discipline, and an understanding of how to work together. I suspect you'll see the same with AI is like there's going to be like the chief AI officer or whatever for a while. It's going to be its own thing. It's going to hang out, but eventually it's just going to be like, yeah, everybody works on AI stuff. Like that's like what matters. So then to answer your specific question slightly instead of the question I wanted to answer, I think understanding how to drive impact in the business will always be high value. That might be a selfish answer for myself, but the reason a growth team exists is because it is the natural tendency of organizations to focus on power users, especially product orgs, right? Those are the people who complain the most. Those are the people who ask for features. They're the ones who pay you the most money. So it needs to be somebody's job to be like, can we please pay attention to the person who's never signed up for this thing yet? Right. And that's really it's really like owning new user experience. Like that's really foundationally what a growth product company does, right? In a lot of ways. And so not all of it, but like most of it. And then thinking about it commercially, connecting the dots to numbers and dollars. And I think those two things probably become even more important in an AI driven product world because the
Yeah.
tendency of products to hyper personalize around their most power users is probably even stronger than ever.
Yeah, I just related to the growth specialization. Everyone asked, what advice would you give people at the beginning of their growth product career in the realm of AI? Interestingly, it's kind of the same. I was just thinking about this. It's the same advice that I've actually been giving for years, which is I think the thing that people underinvest in the most within the growth specialization, and honestly in any product role, is understanding user psychology. Just like what influences users like decisions and actions in the product is like we just tend to take a very rational approach to thing, and the answer to what influences users behavior tends to be very irrational things. And so there are some folks like, that we know, like who's been on the pod, like Darius Contractor, for example, who is like, there's these folks that just like approach that topic with such depth and nuance and creativeness. And as a result, like they just think so differently. They come up with such like different set of solutions. And I think even in the realm of AI, I would still invest in understanding like user psychology and how that connects to software products is really, really key. And this goes much deeper than understanding like things like you know, if I put a times running out 1 hour piece of text that people will like convert more and stuff like that. It's like understanding complex flows and what's going through the users' heads and how you can influence that with both software, copy, all those types of things. Anything to add to that, Fareed?
No, I think that's great advice. I agree.
All right. Let's move on. I think we got time for a couple more. Once again, you can click that Q&A button that took me a while to find in the bottom of Zoom, submit a question or upvote like an existing one along the way. We've talked about Joyce's, like it's going from IC route, more future proof than the managerial route. So I'm gonna skip that one. But somebody asked, advancing product career with AI versus advancing AI product career. This feels a little meta. I'm not exactly sure, but
I think the
for so
question here is like, do I make myself a better product manager using AI tools? Or do I get good at building customer facing AI tools? Like, should I, advancing my AI products career or my product career with AI and the back and forth? I think the problem with this is there are limited opportunities to do the second, right? Like in the not limited, there's plenty, but like in the grand scheme of all PM roles in the world, AI customer driven AI products is some subset of those, right? And probably competition around those. But if you can get it, I would do it. There's no, like we said, there's no replacement for building, right? If you believe, and let's take this, like, look, there have been trends in the past 5 to 6 years that have turned out not to be all that important. If you like, or as big as we thought they would be. If you went all in on like crypto product management as your spike in your tea, you might have some limited opportunities right now, right? Because it's still a small market. I'm not saying anything about whether it's going to be the long-term successful or not, but it's certainly not part of everything. So beware the hype there. But like this seems real. Like people use it, it solves real problems. So I don't know. I don't know how to think about that. I just think like you need to do both. And I
I
think
think it's
doing
both.
the
I,
first
yeah,
becomes the second over time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the my internal advice to my team is like I think AI is not a tech is not a strategy. AI basically helps you develop new solutions to existing customer problems, right? So new solutions that you couldn't create before to existing customer problems, or it helps you solve customer problems that were impossible to solve before, right? And so it doesn't matter what part of the product you're touching. There is probably, whether you're working on an existing customer problem or a new customer problem, there are probably new solutions that are enabled by this technology, and they're just going to become the expectation, from users, like these experiences, like very rapidly over time. And so, anyways, I also think it's both along the way. All right. Tong asked, digging a little bit deeper with the RAG example I gave earlier, wondering the specific skills one would kind of need for understanding a bunch of the things that I mentioned. What would the JD look like? Is it like a PM? Is it a technical PM? Um, uh, you know, it's interesting is like, I certainly think that if you have more of a technical background, it helps because that probably helps you understand some of the levers underneath the hood faster. as well as like understanding some of the nuance. But I don't think it's required, right? Like it has been 19 years since I've touched PHP like code since like my quote unquote technical chops. And I felt like I was able to come to my own understanding in synthesis about some deeper technical pieces that even, our engineers hadn't like touched yet. And I was able to have like a conversation about them. So I think I'm watching internally too at our different product people. We have one person that's a little bit more technical on the spectrum and others that are a little bit less technical on the spectrum. And I'm just seeing differences between the two on like how they're leveraging this knowledge and stuff. But it's helpful, not required. Anyways, what would go into the JD for you, Fareed?
I mean, this is the tricky thing. A very product minded, like customer focused engineer who's actually building is probably the best lead for an AI products team. Like if you can find them, right? Like there aren't a lot of these in the world. They're rare. That's why product management exists, et cetera. Or like a designer who can code. Like there are some like interesting, like if you're A plus B, you're in a really good place. Like if you're like we had a couple of these at Slack, like really product minded, highly technical engineers, right? Who's like, it wasn't technical complexity that interested them. It was like solving specific customer problems. And they're like real dangerous in a good way because like they can, again, remember the thing I was saying about SQL and closing the loop? If you're an engineer who can have a product insight, tinker with the technology, solve the problem, and then close the loop quickly and iterate again, that's way faster than me and you sitting and talking and saying, well, why don't you try this? And then them having to go figure it out. So obviously, if you can find that person, that's the best, right? Like that would be incredible. Um, but I think it's really about curiosity. And I think the nice thing
Oh yeah,
about
I
these
think it is.
tools is that the tools unlock a curious person to be able to look a lot like a technical person, even if they're not.
Technical person in disguise. All right.
Exactly.
Mohammed asked, thoughts on continuous discovery iteration cycles, right? Do they get fat? Like, how do they change? My initial response is I think there are some things that get way faster because of some of the things that we were talking about. Like, if you look at the different steps of the iteration cycle or continuous discovery, right? There's um, tooling to help you collect and understand the customer feedback, much faster than you could before. There's tooling to help with like all of the project management tasks of like creating the supporting assets of like PRDs and stuff. There are tools that are helping develop prototypes like faster, right? Like there's all those kinds of things. So I think there are definitely areas that speed up, but I think there are some areas, as I was talking before, that I think slow down actually, right? So I think some of our iteration cycles on some of the stuff that we're doing internally, like beta testing internally with AI, have slowed down because of some of the methodology things that we've learned before. Like the typical design prototype just does not get the right signal on customer feedback, right? Like building benchmark data sets and like tinkering with those. So there are some areas that probably feel like they slow down as well. But Fareed, do you have a take on how this process changes at all?
This one's hard for me to answer because I've been sort of in the advising space for a little too long to
I
be
don't have to
that
do
close to
this.
the
Yeah,
wire.
yeah.
No, I just am,
Yeah.
and this is actually a concern for me. This is what I'm worried about, is that
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
you don't know.
know.
Yeah.
I'm too far from the execution right now to really have a strong opinion about this. And that terrifies me, just to be clear. It like absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah. All right. I think we have time for one more. Let's see. Um, oh, interesting. Uh, Ibrahim asked, how can one get better at extracting insights from raw customer feedback, which we talked about before?
Wow. Um,
Ibrahim, you blew Fareed's
I,
mind.
I'm Yeah. Nolan said something. Reps. It's true.
The reps is part of it.
Reps is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
huge one. I think I've been like the thing I've used the most recently to get raw customer feedback and conversations is Gong. And I've been very surprised by like just what unlocks when you record every sales call, when you record every customer call. Like is like suddenly it's a huge trove of information that you never would have had otherwise. And I think this is starting to happen everywhere else. But the question is like, how do you find the stuff that matters? Like, man, listening to a 1 hour sales call can be a real drag. And I don't think that there's a lot of great, there's still lacking in terms of like finding the meat of it. So again, it's a lot like data analysis, where I think like you have to just block off some time to be like, I have no goal in this. I just want to
Mm.
like find
You just wade in it.
interesting things.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
just
yeah.
wallowing in it. You're like laying in the jacuzzi of customer data and waiting to see what interests you, you know? And I think that's the best way to do it. I found some of my most valuable growth data insights doing that with data, like just clicking on dashboards and being like, oh, let me ask another question, another question. And I think you kind of have to do that with customer insight, because the ability to ask good questions comes from like a native understanding of like what's in there and what people are saying. And the only way to get that is to be like hanging out in the room. You know, it's sort of like you can't get a feel for a city if you've never been
I'm
there. You
we're
can't get a feel for the product if you're never hanging out in the customer calls, you know?
we're 100% creating an image of you in the jacuzzi
Oh
of
no.
customer data, just like basking in it. Uh, I think I had like a few quick thoughts that come to mind.
Please.
The waiting one is a good one. Usually the way that I approach is I wade in and then I try to find, the themes across a bunch of it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like the breadth part. But then to what you were saying earlier is like, I don't all feedback isn't equal. There are sometimes users and customers that tend to give you that are just like the exceptions to being able to like communicate the problem exceptionally, describe it in different words and all that kind of stuff. And it's like when you read this, you're like, ooh, like this is like a little bit different. And I think finding those are really interesting and important because the majority of customers are actually really bad at describing their customer problems and stuff. And so when you find the nuggets, right, those are really interesting ones to zero in on, ask follow-up questions, look at the words they're using to describe, the problem or the solution. And so I try to spend like more time with those folks, try to like pull them into the process, just taking a sentence and emailing them and saying, "Hey, you said this in your feedback. Can you say more? Just get them talking more." Um, and so those are like a couple additional things that came to mind. All right, we got a wrap here. That was our first ever
That was fun.
kind of live recording of Unsolicited Feedback. Hopefully, you all enjoy the upcoming season. New episodes will be dropping in about a week or so, I believe. And uh, and I'm sure we will be touching on this topic, you know, throughout the season as things change. Other than that, check out reforge.com if you haven't. We've got a couple AI courses and product management career courses related to this topic that I'm sure this topic will be interweaved. And you can always follow Fareed and I on the socials, LinkedIn and Twitter along the way. Fareed, any other final messages?
No, that's it. This was super fun. It kind of feels more real when there's like just faces watching. So I appreciate y'all. Those of you with your cameras on, it feels, I know we didn't call on you live, but it does feel good to like know there's people there watching. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.